Yeah, my name is Craig, and I'm an interaction designer working at DWP. I just want to start off by saying I don't have a disability yet. And the reason why I say yet is because the prevalence of disability rises with age. So 6% of children, 16% of working age adults, and 45% of adults over state pension age have a disability. So there's like a definite hockey stick going on there. Like, you know, it goes up exponentially as we get older. So the likelihood of developing a disability at some point in your life is about 45% once you get older. And it's particularly for me, like, I didn't sort of realize that people living with disabilities were as common as they were. There's roughly 11.9 million adults in the UK living with a disability. It's 1 in 5 people, or 20%. And in 2017, only 22% of adults living with a disability said they'd never used the internet. So that's about 2.6 million people. And if we deduct the second figure from the first figure, it means 9.3 million people in the UK are living with a disability and browsing the internet. So that's like 9.3 million people that could be trying to use your website or trying to buy things from your online store and such. And I think this was particularly sometimes is whenever we think of a disability, like, people often think of a wheelchair, but there's a lot of disabilities that are less obvious, and this can kind of make we're ignorant. It probably doesn't help when the international symbol for anything to do with disability is this symbol, and it's often accompanied with things like disabled parking. So immediately you kind of, this person sat in the chair looking, you know, they don't look particularly independent in that logo, and then it's accompanied with, you know, this is disabled parking space, so you automatically got that mindset of disability. There's been a bit of a push lately to try and move the logo to something a bit more empowering. So there's a movement now where people are trying to show the second logo instead, where, you know, the person's leaning forward and propelling themselves rather than kind of sitting there waiting to be pushed. And they're trying to change the wording to be more around accessible parking, so it's, you know, it's a bit less derogatory. The movement online is accessibleicon.org, and if you go on there, you can buy stickers and templates and all sorts where you can kind of put them over the top. I think the idea is that you're supposed to put the stickers over the top of things on your own property. I don't think you're supposed to kind of go out and deface other people, so that's not what I'm recommending you do. But yeah, like, disabilities and impairments are not the same, so that sign for disability often kind of, it kind of lumps them together. An impairment is, it's medical, it's the condition or the symptom that the person experiences, so this could be low vision or blindness. Whereas a disability is when the person finds it difficult to perform everyday tasks to a level that's considered normal for most people. So it's important to kind of note that these are slightly different. One's medical and one's kind of when you're not able to do something that you otherwise would be able to do. So for example, if you know, if you've got low vision, you might not consider yourself disabled, but if the only way you could get anywhere was to drive, then suddenly you would become disabled, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's the important point to remember, is that, you know, a person with an impairment might not always consider themselves to be disabled. So for example, if you imagine you're in a wheelchair and you want to get a book from the library, you might start off in your house. All the benches have been lowered, there's loads of space for you to move around and maneuver. You leave your house via the wheelchair access ramp that you've got outside. On your way to the library, you encounter crossings, but all of the controls are mounted low down a post, the curbs are dropped, you can roll up and down on the way to the library, and then you get there and the library looks like this. So now all of a sudden you're disabled, but you weren't in your house or in the environment when you were getting there. Like, there's no wheelchair ramp here, there's no lift, doesn't look like there's any way to contact anyone to kind of help you. So like, all of a sudden it's the environment that's disabled you. If the library looked like this, you might have been able to just roll in, get your book and be on your way, and it might never have bothered you in the first place. So people are not always disabled by their impairments. They're disabled by poorly designed environments. So in that last example, like with the two libraries, you would get the same person in two places, and in one area they might not be disabled at all, and in the other they're completely disabled because there's no way, people haven't took their needs into consideration. And an environment might not always be a physical space, like it can be digital, so it's the websites and the apps and stuff that we build as a space in which they need to operate. Example 2 is, imagine you're colorblind and you want to check how well a team's playing before placing a bet. So you might be into football on the sad day and want to place an accumulator or something. You head to a website, and it's got the form of the team on the right hand side, so you can see Manchester City have won 4 and drawn 1. But the problem is, like, if you're colorblind, like, all you see is this. So suddenly the wins and the losses and the draws all kind of start to merge together. So this is kind of where, well, this was actually, it was BBC Sports website. They've changed it now. They've actually done quite a lot of work around this, and now they've still got the colours, but you can see they've got a W for a win and an L for a loss, and just little things like that kind of, to the colourblind person, the colours still look the same, but at least now they've got that extra information, which means that they're no longer excluded from using the website. You can actually simulate color blindness with a couple of plugins. So this is Sim Daltonism, which you can get for your MacBook, which just basically puts a window over the top and you can drag it around wherever you need it to go, and it'll actually simulate the color blindness. There's also a Chrome plugin called Funkify, and Photoshop itself actually has colorblind proof setup, so you can actually check your work. And I think the idea is just run any designs you're doing through this kind of stuff and just make sure you're not using color as a sole way of conveying information. And when using color, it's really important to take note of contrast as well, because the wrong contrast can make things like really intense. So black and white's often the obvious choice, but even to some people, that can look quite intense, particularly people with dyslexia. People with dyslexia often prefer softer contrast, so yellow on blue and blue on yellow and such. We actually had a designer that we used to work with who would print everything out on the yellow paper just because they found it easier to work with. And often people with dyslexia also like borders around things to kind of chunk things up. But yeah, just referring back to contrast, if we make it too low contrast, it can just make everything difficult to read for everybody. So yeah, there's a decent ratio that we normally go to use, and you might have seen this before, kind of pops up in every talk, but there's this WebAIM website where you can actually check whether your colors are meeting the minimum sort of ratios. So if you were to put your foreground, your background color in, it'll just tell you whether it passes or not. In government where I work, we try to do everything to AA standard. So if color contrast is below AA standard, this would flag as a fail, and then we wouldn't be able to use that combination. There's also a Mac plugin just called Contrast, which allows you to do the same thing. This isn't as good as the WebAIM website because it doesn't take font size into consideration. So there's some contrast ratios which are kind of on the fence, where if the font size is small enough, it's a fail. But if the font size is bigger, then it considers it a pass. And this doesn't deal with the font sizes at all. It just literally tells you if the color ratios. So sometimes this will tell you it's a fail when it's actually a pass. So just be careful of that if you're going to use it. But yeah, this brings me on to say, like, accessibility should be designed from the start and not an afterthought. So while you're doing all of this kind of stuff, it's a lot better to consider it at the beginning than it is to get all the way to the end and then try and shoehorn it in. Because if you try and shoehorn it at the end, you'll often end up with something that just isn't fit for purpose. Yeah, I mean, this is just, this blew my mind when I saw this. You know, like, oh, you just come in and ask for the wheelchair ramp to get in? Yeah, I don't know. But it also leaves you with really clunky solutions. So in this case, they've actually made it accessible, but the design's obviously horrendous. So it's an eyesore, it works, but it's not really, again, the most elegant of solutions. So even if we are thinking about accessibility from the start, implementing it without talking to anybody that actually has to use it is a nightmare. Whenever you look up things on like good examples of accessibility, there's a particular thing that keeps coming out time and time again, and that's Robson Square in Vancouver. So this was kind of, this comes up as a good example where people are like, oh, you know, look how beautiful it is and how accessible it is. But it's a prime example of where people haven't talked to the users that use it, because the ramp's actually really steep. So there's a lot of wheelchair users that say, well, the gradient's too steep. It's supposed to be, what was the figures? So there's a 1 to 20 gradient is recommended, but it's only 1 to 12. So the idea is that for every meter you go up, you should go like 20 along, and theirs is only going 12, which means the elevation of the ramp's much steeper than it should be, which means if you're on a wheelchair and you get halfway up and you get tired, there's no handrails to grab onto. Like, you've got to just put the brakes on and wait it out, or come back down to 30 mile an hour, like backwards, do you know what I mean? Like, and also, because there's a lack of handrails, if you want to do it on the center one, you can actually end up going straight down the stairs. And if the wheel goes over the side, then you're sideways down the stairs. So it's really impractical, and although it looks pretty and everybody kind of quotes it as this great example, when you actually talk to the people that use it, they say it's not ideal. And I think sometimes as designers, like, you know, you can look at that Robson Square example, and, you know, we can say it's not fit for purpose or whatever, but as designers, we don't always make things bad on purpose. It's just a lack of awareness or foresight. So another example is King's Cross lately got refurbed, and this is the ticket booth at King's Cross Station, and it got all kind of all kitted out, and they put this black strip across the window. So there's some designer obviously somewhere went, actually, this would look a lot better if it was balanced. There's like a big gap here. If I put a black strip over the window, it looks like a big rectangle, and then, you know, it looks a lot nicer. But what they've actually done is missed the point of why that was lower in the first place. So the person in the wheelchair is now being totally blacked out. And then sometimes we try to make things better, and we kind of make things worse. So this is an example from, it's a service at DWP. This is the way that we always capture dates in government. It's just 3 text fields with some hint text. And what we found, this works fine in most cases, but what we were doing was we were testing out this particular service, and people kept trying to do this. So they were typing in 3 September in words, and then 1986. And this was happening. So there was like, it was flagging it up that it was an invalid date. It was saying enter a valid date, but the 3rd of September 1986 is a valid date, just we wanted it a 9 instead of the word September. So we were like, oh, well, this is fine. On the back end, we'll just say, well, you know, we'll let you type it in words, and we'll just convert it to a number on the back end, and then like everything will be great. And for people, well, for people that could see this stopped happening, people typed September in, and then we converted it to a 9, and then everything worked fine. But what we didn't take into consideration, once we started testing with people that use assistive technology, we tested with a Dragon user. I don't know if anyone's heard of Dragon, but it's basically, it allows you to speak commands to the computer in plain English. So you can say things like, click continue, and it'll look on the page for a button or something that's labeled continue, and then it'll like click it for you, so you don't have to actually interact with the mouse or the keyboard. And the thing with Dragon is it's really quite smart. It's kind of smarter than you might think it is. If you mark your HTML up properly, it's actually like really powerful. It actually knows the difference between whether the input type is looking for text or a number. So what actually happened when we started changing the number field to a text field started to create more issues. And I've got an example of that now. So this isn't the actual research video, because we've got to throw the research videos away after a month because of GDPR and stuff. But what I've done is just emulated what actually happened using Dragon. So let's see if this works.
Click D.
Now, is that loud enough?
3.
Hang on, I'll pause it a second. Don't know if you want to bump the volume. Try again.
Click D.
That's better, yeah.
3. Press tab. 9. Undo that. 9. Undo that. 09. Undo that. 09. Undo that. 09. Press tab.
So yeah, in the example, obviously the guy in the research session, he kept saying 09, and I just kept typing in like OHNINE because it was a text field. It was like, oh, yeah, it wants me to chuck text in this box, so that's what I'm going to do. And he got stuck, like until he said 09, they just kept putting words in, and obviously it was saying enter a valid month because he wasn't saying September. So we'd actually ended up making it worse for that user. And obviously had we not went out and tested that with a Dragon user, like that would have just not even been on our radar.
So why would it put 09 for 09 and not 5
So
for 0?
presumably, I don't actually know the answer, but presumably it's because 0 is like, O can be taken like either way, but 0, it assumes, oh, well, it's probably a number. But like I say, I don't 100% know, but 09 seemed to work. So it was the only way he got through, but we were sitting watching this guy struggle with this thing, and it kind of sucked for a while. He did get through it eventually, but yeah, it wasn't ideal. So yeah, it's really important to test the product that you're building with people that may have to use it, you know, like them 9.3 million people that might be using the internet with some of these devices. And it's really important as well, if you change anything, to retest it, because in that previous example, it had already worked fine, and the GovUK date pattern's been tested with these technologies over and over again, but we changed it, so we had to retest it. So it's important if you change stuff to make sure that it still works for these devices. What you can do is learn how to use your device's own technology. So like a Mac has a built-in screen reader, and you can get open source ones and stuff like that for Windows and Linux and stuff. With Mac, there's a whole host of shortcuts and stuff that, these things are really powerful. There's so many things you can do with them. But there's probably only about, I muddled my way through on about 3 or 4 commands. At most, there's probably about 10 that you need to be really proficient with it. But even learning 1 or 2, you can kind of get through your web page and have a rough idea if it's going to work or not. Again, you can use NVDA for Windows, which again has about 10 commands that you need to muddle your way through. It's kind of, I'll go over this a bit in more detail, but this doesn't kind of replace doing that testing that we were just talking about. This is just so that you as a designer can have a rough idea of whether you're along the right lines before you take it out and show these people. It's to kind of catch howlers that you might have put in there that are going to ruin the research session. And the reason why I do this sort of stuff is because this is pretty much how I prototype. My code base is often awful. I literally just throw things together just to get some ideas out there in front of people. But then what we do is, we'll test this with sighted users who are using a mouse, and it might be fine. But then when we come to do, obviously, the accessibility testing, this all kind of needs to be cleared up. So this is an example of a screen reader trying to read one of my prototypes. This is just an agent service that I'm working on where we can capture like a claim for a benefit. And the screen reader basically can't get to the tab component. So we've got some tabs in there which allows you to switch to flick between some information, and the screen reader just can't see it at all, even though it's there for the sighted user.
Find visited link, claimant details. Visited
So
link,
it keeps jumping
find
from
a
the
claim,
top link
list
down
2
onto the
items.
list, but
You
it's
are
actually
currently on a
missing the
link,
tab component
visited
completely.
link, claimant details.
So the idea is here it was just me using VoiceOver on Mac. I was able to go actually this is inaccessible. So if we had took this out and put it in front of a user that was using a screen reader, this page would have tanked because they can't interact with it. So before we take it out, it's kind of helpful just for you to go through your own design and kind of make sure that it's at a point where you can at least do everything that you think that they'll need to be able to do, and then you'll get more from your research session, because it can often be quite hard to find people with these sort of technologies or whatever, so you want to get the most out of that research session. So off the back of that, we did some editing, same prototype again, exact same page, same screen reader, everything.
Link, find a claim. Task to complete, selected, tab, 1 of 2, main. You are currently on a tab, 2 of 2. To select this option, press Control, Option, space.
So yeah, it's exactly the same setup. Everything's the same. All that we've done is we've actually put some accessible code in there now where you can actually get to this with a keyboard and with a screen reader and whatnot and actually kind of make sense of the page. But yeah, this is something that kind of tripped me up, where not everyone that uses a screen reader is blind. So we often make this assumption that people who are using the screen reader can't see the page at all. But what we found is that people with dyslexia will often use a screen reader because they find it difficult to read. It's easier for it to just read them out, and they'll use it in a completely different way to somebody that's blind. So we have people where they can't see the screen at all. Sometimes the screen's not even turned on, and they're kind of flying through the website using tab and a handful of shortcuts, and they're not using the mouse at all. Then we've got people who've got dyslexia, for example, and they're kind of navigating through it how you would expect, but then they're clicking on paragraphs to get them to read out and stuff. So it's important to kind of test the things that you're building with a range of people. And when we go back to when I was saying you need to test with people that actually have these impairments and use these devices, it's because everyone uses them differently and nobody's is set up the same. So the more people you can test with, the more robust you can kind of make it. And that's why it's kind of important to make sure that you test with users on their own devices and their own environments. So what we've done in the past, which was a bit of an epic failure, was we managed to get a lab session set up where we had JAWS and we had Dragon and we had all of these things set up, and then we invited people in to use them so we could watch them use the service. And people came in and had no idea how to use it because their JAWS setup was completely different to the one that we had, which was the default one out the box. So their shortcuts weren't working, or their voice commands weren't working, and we spent the majority of the session trying to set it up so that they could use it, then watching them actually use the service and learn anything from it. So if you can go to these people and observe them using, like if you can get them to bring their own phone in, or you can go to them and watch them use their own computer and stuff, it's a lot more valuable. But a lot of accessibility stuff, getting people on board is really hard, like your team, your bosses, your stakeholders, that sort of thing. Like, it's really hard to get people invested into it, particularly in the private sector, I've found. So one of the things I like to do is like to try empathy building within my team. So there's a whole host of things you can kind of try and do. And this isn't particularly to teach people how to do accessibility. This is just to try and get people to understand why we should do accessibility. Everyone's probably seen this by now as well. This is the Microsoft, they've got some guides on different types of impairments. So in this, it's saying, you might have a permanent disability where you've only got one arm. So you're impaired because you can only use the website with one hand, but it may be temporary. You might have injured your arm, or it could be situational. You could be holding something and trying to do it on your phone, with one hand. So with accessibility, if we build these things for people that have these permanent impairments, we never know when we might need them ourselves. So that's quite a useful thing. And you can kind of get people on board using this sort of ethos. Lip reading's hard. A lot of people assume that lip reading, there's been a few times where we've had a session set up where somebody's deaf, and we're like, oh, we need to get an interpreter or whatever, and somebody always goes, oh, well, can they not just lip read? But lip reading is a lot harder than people kind of think. I think a lot of people just assume that it's something that deaf people can do, and it works really well. There's some really good posters you can get from Action Deafness, where it just kind of emulates how difficult it can be. I mean, they're just obviously posters with some visual things, but I'm certainly guilty in meetings and stuff of just kind of sitting behind my hand and doing this. And obviously, if you're deaf, you've got no idea what I'm saying. So that went really weird when I covered that over. So yeah, one of the exercises you can do, this is Malcolm. He's a user researcher. He's working on a project in the hub where I'm working. But this one's quite good in the sense that we just got a load of cards, and they've got similar words that make similar mouth shapes. So they're completely different words. But when you're actually saying them, your team's got to try and guess what it is that they're saying. So we'll have a little go where Malcolm's saying two completely different words, and just kind of have an idea if you know what he's saying. Yeah. Doesn't help that Malcolm's got a particularly posh accent as well, so his mouth's really exaggerated when he's saying it. But same thing again. This is Becky. She's an interaction designer working on the same team as Malcolm. Anyone got any ideas on that one? And the third one's like really difficult. So this is James. He's a front-end developer that works on my team. The beard in particular makes it really difficult because you can't even see the shape of his face. And James is actually... So yeah, it's like just a little exercise we did in a retro once, and it just kind of gets people to understand how difficult it can be to lip read. So, this is just one person doing one word. If somebody's sitting talking at you, obviously it's really difficult. We've also got these things. I've actually got them here, so if anybody wants to have a go of these later, they can do, but these are Vine simulation glasses. These can be quite good to build empathy again. What they are basically is they're just safety glasses that have been modified. So they simulate different impairments. So there's 12 different ones in the box, and each one comes with like a book and stuff which tells you what they are. But that one, for example, is tunnel vision. And the idea is when you put these glasses on, obviously it's not perfect, but it gives you an idea roughly of how these people have to kind of navigate the world. And we do some workshops where we make people put these glasses on, and then all you've got to do is you've got to get across the other side of the office and read a poster, and it sounds simple enough, but as soon as you put these on, like with some of them, you need somebody to guide you across the office, or you're going to bin it over a table or something. And even when you get to the poster, sometimes you see people with their nose on the poster trying to read it, and it's like just something that we might take for granted, like walking across and reading a poster. It just suddenly becomes this monumental task. So yeah, they don't, I mean, you don't get a total grasp of what it's like. I mean, if you had something like retinitis pigmentosa, which is tunnel vision, this might be all you see. And the glasses can kind of simulate that. And for a brief period when you've got them on, you do kind of feel that vulnerability. But what you tend to find is people start looking around the impairments, like out the bottom of the glasses and stuff. And then it's like, oh, well, it's not too bad if I look down there. But obviously, if it was your eyes, it would just be everywhere you looked. So they work to a point to build that kind of empathy, but they don't, they don't obviously, it makes you appreciate it a little bit, but it's obviously way worse. But this is my team having a go. They were trying to read some poems in some different size fonts and stuff with different glasses on, just to kind of see how difficult it was. But like I say, I've got these, so afterwards, if anyone wants to go, just come give me a shout. Another thing you can do is unplug the mouse on a computer and just try and have people do a task. Like, all right, you've got no mouse now, use the keyboard, go on Google BBC weather, find out what the weather's going to be like on Saturday or something. And you see people obviously have no idea they're trying to tab to things, or they're trying to use page up and page down, and the page is skipping all over the place. It's really difficult. Another thing is to play video with the screen turned off. It could be as simple as playing it on a laptop and just not showing them the screen, and trying to have people work out what the video is about. Because what you find a lot of the time with radio and podcasts and stuff is, because they know people can't see, they're a lot more descriptive in the way that they talk. But when it's on a video and they're showing you an example or whatever, they're a lot more, they don't describe what's going on. They just kind of talk as if they expect you to be able to see, and it becomes really difficult. So again, it can be another way to build empathy, is just say, tell me what's going on in this video, turn the screen around and see how many people get it right. There's a little activity we'll do, which is the opposite. So this is just a video that I've muted. It's only a 30-second clip of a newsreader, but you've got to try and figure out what's going on in the video. So there's a newsreader talking a bit enthusiastically about something, leaning in, so it looks really important. Now we've got a building with some plants or something on the side, maybe, yeah, trees. A cement truck. Some people walking past more trees on a building. Now, like, anyone got any ideas what this video is about, or what it could be about?
I saw a sign for Westminster City Hall.
So it's somewhere in London. So we've got a video about somewhere in London. So yeah, nailed it. So yeah, could be something as simple as adding subtitles. So yeah, the newsreader's obviously just saying there's a pollution problem. Putting some greenery on the outside of buildings might be a way to solve it. There's a 21-meter high building with a load of plants on it. And apparently it's the largest of its type in London. But yeah, basically something as simple as subtitles suddenly gives the video the context that it needs. And the thing is with subtitles as well is, like, I use subtitles a lot. Like if I'm on a train and there's a video that I want to watch, or a news thing pops up or something, but I don't want to sit and blast it out in the quiet carriage of a train. The video doesn't have subtitles on it. I just skip past it and don't watch it. So something as simple as just captioning a video can make all the difference. If you want to add your own subtitles, there is a open source thing called Aegisub, which it's a bit time consuming, but it allows you to actually caption the video using a .srt file, which you can then upload to YouTube and stuff. One of the easiest ways to subtitle a video is to upload it to YouTube and have YouTube automatically pick the subtitles out for you, but it's really bad at doing so, particularly if you're like me and got quite a strong Geordie accent. So what it can do is it can create the SRT file for you, and then obviously you make sure that you go through and edit it and make sure that it says the right thing, but it saves a lot of time if you just get YouTube to give you a running start and then you go back and tweak it up. But this is quite good for the same thing. It's just a bit more time consuming.
Is that an application or a web app?
It is, so the version I was using, it was a Mac app, but you can get it for Windows as well. I don't use Windows, so I don't know if it installs. I've just seen that you can get it, but it's open source. It works on any platform. It would be better if it was a web app, I think, but I had to download an actual application to use it. If you can't supply subtitles for the video, like with an SRT file, or actually overlaying them onto the video so that they're permanently, at the very least include a transcript. It could just be a text file that basically says everything that people say in the video. And at least worst case scenario is if you can't see the subtitles or you can't see the video or whatever, you can just use the screen reader on the transcript and you kind of get an idea of what's going on. An HTML page is better, but worst case scenario, use a text file. Some more things to build empathy are these posters. These were done by Home Office Digital, and they've been translated into about 22 languages now. Like they're really quite popular, but these are like just some basic do's and don'ts. So there's a one there for designing for screen readers, where it's saying, use alt tags and don't only show information in an image or video. And we've got these up all over government, all over the place, because there's like a load of different ones for different impairments. And they are quite popular. It's just a sort of, whenever you're designing something, just make sure that you kind of pay attention to these, and you can see if you've put any of the don'ts in, kind of see if you can work around them. But an example is this, like designing for users on the autistic spectrum, do write in plain language and don't use figure of speech or idioms, so things like raining cats and dogs. Some people who've got autism or people where English isn't their first language, like idioms, they create a lot of unnecessary cognitive load. Like they take it quite literally. They don't understand, like, what do you mean, like raining cats and dogs? Like they just don't get it. Which kind of, it brings me on to this example. So this is, it's a website called kidly.co.uk. I'm at that age now where all of my friends are having children. And I was like looking to buy a baby gift for somebody. And somebody told us about this website. So I went on to buy a gift. And I got as far as trying to sort of like check out, and it was trying to force us into making an account. And then I ended up getting so wound up with it that I didn't actually buy anything and went off and wrote a blog post about how terrible it was anyway. But there's a lot wrong with this example where they're putting the error messages, for example, under the fields. So if you come into this with a screen reader and you make an error, you won't know there's an error on there until you've actually went past the thing that has the error in. So if you say you went down to the label, it's got recipient name, and then you go down to the field and it's going to read out the field. Then if you go down again, it's going to say, please enter a recipient name, and you're going to have to go back up. So it could have been something as simple as putting the error message under the label, so it gave it context and then allowed you to flow into the box to fix it. But anyway, that wasn't the thing that bugged me the most about this website. It was this. So it's going back to that thing about plain language. So what a lot of companies like to do, particularly Virgin Trains actually at the moment, is they like to try and give their organization a voice, I suppose is the way they word it. But they do all this kind of quirky stuff. So it's like, oops, you forgot to pop in your number. Don't be shy. And it's like, if English isn't your first language, you might be thinking like, how do I pop in a number? Like that doesn't kind of make sense. And then it's kind of that bit at the end, like, don't be shy. It's like, I didn't give you my number because I didn't want all of your marketing spiel. Like, I'm not shy. Like, it's not Tinder. Like, I don't want to give you my number for that reason, but you've made it mandatory and then put this horrible thing in. So yeah, I'm getting ranty about it again. But basically, yeah, use plain language, and it makes things a lot easier for people to understand. Not only, like, everyone would want the content to be simpler. People don't want to have to work out, throughout the quirkiness, what it is they've got to do. If you've ever seen Stephen Proctor talk, or if you haven't seen Stephen Proctor talk about this kind of stuff, definitely go and do that, because one, he's hilarious, and two, he talks a lot about talking in plain English, and it's something as simple as that makes all the difference. At the very least, there's a lot of online tools you can use for accessibility. So this is Wave, and what you can do is just run a website through it, and it'll do a load of checks for you. So it'll go and look if your images have alt tags, it'll check your contrast ratios, it'll check your heading sizes, things like that. And it'll give you kind of like a rundown at the side. So you've kind of got, this example's actually got no errors, but it would flag anything that was a major error, something that it thinks could be an error, and then some stuff that's like quite good. But a lot of people kind of rely on this stuff too much. So with some people, they consider their website to be accessible because they've run it through Wave, and Wave says it's okay. But the automated accessibility tools aren't enough. So you can run these things against your site manually, or you can set it up in your pipeline to run these things. but they don't pick up enough. GDS actually did some work where they deliberately introduced 142 known accessibility issues. So they built a site, deliberately put all of these issues into it, and then ran it through some of this stuff. And the best one only found 40% of them. So out of 142 known accessibility issues, the most you're going to catch is about 40%, which is less than half, which is a bit useless, which is obviously why we don't rely on this when you actually do take it out and test it with these users. So yeah, just to recap, the tools, all of the exercises and stuff that I've just shown you, they can be really good to build empathy and to find really obvious things, but they can never replace usability testing. If you go out and actually see people using your site with these tools, you'll learn a hell of a lot more than you will by just doing this sort of thing. So yeah, back to getting people on board. It's really easy for me working in government because by law, all public sector websites and apps need to be accessible by 2021. So everyone in government's doing this because they have to. There's actually a load of legal spiel on GovUK that says, you know, you'll be breaking the law if you don't. But private sector companies aren't necessarily exempt. So at the moment, it's focusing primarily on public things. So it's like government websites, you know, your councils, that sort of thing. Like there's like a hierarchy. So it's going to look at the big hitters first and then work its way down the chain. But yeah, the reason why I say private sector companies are not necessarily exempt is the same thing happened in America. But actually there's a lot of big companies getting hit. So there's Winn-Dixie, for example. They've recently lost in court because somebody sued them for their website not being accessible. And as a big hitter, they were determined, yeah, it should be accessible. So they kind of got hit with a book. Target's another big one. They've just settled for $6 million because they got taken to court because their website wasn't accessible. And there's actually a whole host of them. So America's accessibility laws came in about 10 years ago. Like theirs came in a lot sooner than ours. But now 10 years later, a lot of private sector firms are actually starting to get hit with it. So it's safe to assume the UK is probably going to go the same way. You know, it's going to start with government, but so many years down the line, this sort of stuff's going to start hitting private companies as well. And like we were just saying there that Target spent $6 million like paying off somebody that took them to court because their website's inaccessible. Like it would have been much cheaper to spend that money on making their website accessible than it would have been by not doing anything, burying their head in the sand and then eventually getting hit with it. So it's important to spend your money on accessibility and not lawyers because eventually it will come back and bite you, I guess. But not even just that, you know, like people say money talks and whatnot, and sometimes it's more the stick than the carrot, I guess. But if your product's inaccessible, we talked that there's like potentially an extra 10 million customers that would be able to use your site and would be able to buy things off it. So, you know, even if you've got two competitors and one is accessible and one's not, they've got a potential 10 million more customers that are going to use their website because they can, versus the ones that can't and they'll go elsewhere because they're kind of rooting about in the dark trying to buy something. And also so this is like, that was kind of talking from if you have your own product. So if you're working on a product that you have users for, that stuff kind of applies. If you work in an agency, for example, where you're offering services, you're building websites and products and services for other people, accessibility experts are really rare at the moment. Like they're quite ahead of the bell curve. And there's a lot of talk and buzz around accessibility at the moment, but nobody's really doing it that much. And it's a real niche thing. And if you work in an agency where you can provide this kind of thing, like people are going to pay for that because this is going to come around a lot sooner now with all these laws and stuff coming into place. So it's going to be a case of if you go, you know, if somebody comes to you for a website and you can't make it accessible, eventually they're going to go elsewhere. So, you know, again, if you work in that kind of environment, these are the kind of things that we should be thinking about. But we should be passionate about accessibility because it's the right thing to do. A lot of people focus on the money and the return on investment and all that sort of thing, but ultimately it's about not excluding people. It's about making sure that everyone gets the same experience and everyone can do the same things. And we shouldn't be excluding somebody just because they've got an impairment. And like we were saying before, if we design with accessibility in mind, it makes things better for everybody, regardless of whether you've got that impairment permanently or temporary or whatever. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. So thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan Mears, Site Service, we spoke earlier.
Yeah.
2 questions really. One was, how do you source your use for the testing for the things you do for your website? And why do you think it's difficult to get people on board for these testing?
So we've got a few, because it's government and everything's kind of contract based, like we have some sources where, so our user researchers are in contact with certain charities where they can help us recruit people. A lot of the time, like the service I work on is an internal service, so it's a service that staff use. It doesn't get used by people like citizens. It's not a citizen-facing service, so people don't kind of find out on GovUK and use it. They would apply for the benefit, and then the agents are actually using that system to process it, if that makes sense. And what it is we're in the fortunate position where, because it's an internal service, we can take it to a lot of civil servants that are using this kind of technology. So for my project in particular, we just source civil servants that are using Jaws and Dragon and that sort of thing, and we test our service with them. But for the citizen-facing things, where we do use charities and stuff like that, which will help us. What's the word I'm looking for? They've got they screen people for people that use these kind of devices and people that have these impairments, and then we test with them. And then what was the second part of the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, you were talking about sort of it's very difficult to get people on board in terms of, I think it was around sort of getting awareness of disability and that. Why do you think that is?
So a lot of it is, so what I've found personally is that people see this, like when accessibility and stuff comes up, sometimes it's time pressures. So some things that they've got so long to deliver a thing, and they say accessibility is kind of something they can just do later, or they can push further down the backlog and kind of worry about it later on. Like the time pressure seems to play a lot into it. Say we've got to deliver all of these features and making them accessible. I don't want to sprint on the work to every feature that we develop, sort of thing. Another thing is a lot of the time, particularly in the private sector, is money. So like in government, like I said, we're kind of mandated to do it, so it's a lot easier for us. But particularly in private companies, like agencies and stuff that I've worked at, they don't have the interest in it, because at the moment they're not seeing the return on investment for it. Like they've got to train all of their staff to do it, they've got to send people to conferences and whatnot to learn about it. The whole thing takes longer, and they just don't see the value in it, which is sad, really.
I agree.
Yeah. Does that answer the questions?
Thanks for the answer, name. Really good talk, I thought. It's great to see what you guys are doing, certainly from a government scale as well, which is brilliant. The sim specs, I do encourage everyone to have a go. My word of advice is that it won't necessarily simulate what an actual person would see with that condition, because those conditions will vary from person to person. That's coming from someone that works as well, from a site charity, so please do have a go.
Thank you.
Any more questions? With the error message stuff, you're saying that if it's underneath the field, then the screen reader doesn't. I don't know how screen readers work that well, but say if you put it above the field, does it backtrack and then read it out and then go back to the
So a screen reader normally just reads down the DOM, usually. Like you can't do stuff with it to make it skip, so you can make it just go straight to headings, for example. But with error message, it's a really interesting one, because if you hit the submit button and the page refreshes, the first thing you've got to do is tell that screen reader that something's went wrong. So your page title, for example, the thing that comes up in the tab, when you've got loads of tabs open and that thing comes up, like that should probably say error, because the first thing the screen reader is going to read out. Then you want to go on to kind of say at the top, like a summary, like something's gone wrong. What we do in government then is we list the fields that have errors on them, and they're like anchor tagged down to them fields, so you can actually jump down the page and get straight back to that part that's got the error in it. In terms of what the screen reader will do is every time you highlight a part of the page, say you click on a div, it's going to then like read the stuff in order, the DOM order in that div, if that makes sense. So say you've got an order list, it's going to start at the top and read out the legend or whatever you've got in there, like a heading, then it's going to go down the list. If you put your error message at the bottom, I mean, you can move it there with styling if you want, but as long as the DOM order is still in the right order, it'll read it out in that order. So what you want to do is say something like, first name, and then the error might be like, cannot be blank, and then the error message. So you're telling somebody like to do something like enter your first name, and then it means when the screen reader gets it, it's going to go full name, enter a full name, and then the field. Whereas if you put it at the bottom, it's going to go full name, edit text, and then when you go out of that box, then it's going to read the error. So it's kind of, does that make sense?
That makes sense. It's interesting though, because like best practices now are making like restful experiences where you don't have, you say like when you press that button, you say the page refreshes. With like something that's restful, like APIs, you would not refresh the page, you'd just be like, all the errors come, so then how do you get back to the top?
So what you can do, like JavaScript makes it a bit more difficult. So again, in government, we use JavaScript really lightweight. We tend to just refresh the page and have it read it out because it's easier. But obviously, I know in the private sector, when you want things to be like whizzy and flashy and stuff, like everything is done in JavaScript. But there is things you can hook into. So there's like ARIA tags where you can do like an ARIA alert. And if you file that with JavaScript, it will kind of override some stuff and make the screen reader read out that something's changed. So you need to make sure that every time you're doing sliding something in and sliding something out, that you tag it up properly so that the screen reader knows what's happening. So you can use like ARIA for that. It's like an I don't know what they call it, an ARIA tag. Actually, it's more like an attribute. But yeah, you put this ARIA attribute on it, and there's a load of different ones you can use, and it just kind of helps. Give the screen reader context around what's happening. But again, with errors, yeah, you can alert them using that sort of thing if you're using JavaScript.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've always thought put them straight underneath because that's where like maybe more padding or margin would be, so you can just whack them in there.
Yeah.
Visually, it sits nice, but I've always been doing it wrong.
It's one of them things where I mean, you probably can put it wherever you want and make it accessible. But by default, the screen reader is going to go through the DOM in that order. So it makes sense to just put it in that order rather than trying to hack it with ARIA tags. Like a lot of the time when people first find out about ARIA, they're like, oh, I'm just going to ARIA tag all of the things, where most people who use a screen reader and stuff are kind of used to the way that native elements read out. So you should use ARIA really sparingly. Like if you can get away with it, use as much basic HTML as you can. Like just tag everything up properly. Don't have a div as a button and put a click pointer or whatever, like use a button because they're going to know what that is with the screen reader and stuff. So yeah, it's better to just start with really simple markup, and if you do have to hack some stuff, use ARIA, but try not just like all of the things, just kind of get away with it.
That's really good, thank you. Got time for one more question?
Yeah.
Is there any difference in testing in considering like accessibility on apps compared to websites?
So I don't develop apps, so my answer might not be totally correct, but with apps, like with iPhone particularly, I would assume the screen reader, like they use VoiceOver, so you want to make sure it's a bare minimum that it's going to work on that sort of thing. And I assume you'd have to test like your gestures and stuff, because if somebody's got fingers missing or whatever, they might not be able to do certain gestures. But I think they've got accessibility settings for it anyway on the phone. So, but yeah, I don't work in app development, so I can't answer that.
I think they use the same accessibility voice software for iPhone as they do for Mac.
So is that what just VoiceOver?
I think so.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry.
Right, please give another round of applause for Craig.